This recording is a follow-up to the end of our discussion of Henry Tam and the MGI case. One of the things we kind of left things with was, if you were Henry at the end of the case, what could you try to do? This is a situation where a team was working together for a while and had established some problematic habits and was experiencing some dysfunctional conflict and not strong processes around decision making, for example. So if you wanted to think, what happens once you've started a team? What do you do with this? I think there's a nice way to think about performance processes and phases of performance that can help us think about what to do in these kinds of situations. So I think the first thing to consider is that all teams go through performance phases. And this research basically says there's cycles of transition and action and transition and action. And the first stage really isn't, it's hard to call it transition, because if you're just launching a team, there's preparation. So before a team does anything, and we talked about this at some length with Henry Tam, that there wasn't that preparation. The team didn't come together and spend essentially a strategic planning or launch session to clarify and solidify the mission, the goals, the strategy of what the team and ultimately the startup was supposed to be doing. And that would be what I would constitute as planning. And so at the end of the case, this is not where we are, but we could think about if there's a break, and it might be, for instance, after the business plan competition was done, that we would think about another transition, right? So the team engaged in action, finished a major phase, and then there's an opportunity for transition again before starting another phase. But if we come back over here and think about the beginning or the preparation, there's quite a lot of research that suggests that planning, and in particular pre-planning, planning before there's actually any performance of the task, is associated with higher team performance. There is something called in-process planning, which is what it sounds like. You just start working and then you kind of try to set up some project management and parameters as you go. But teams that pre-planned outperform those that didn't do this. And then the other thing is this transition phase. After significant performance cycles, the idea that you have a transition or a time to reflect after some task engagement or performance to diagnose and perform and improve for future work together is also very vital. And teams that had the opportunity to plan between periods of task completion or subtasks or major parts of projects, they performed much better than teams that didn't do this. So again, I don't think it's terribly surprising to hear this. I think what's challenging is that there are so many teams that just start working together without this sort of initial launch of strategic planning. And teams don't work in a steady state. They have to shift between processes. And there's times when they complete a focal part of a task and then have to start another one. And there is research that suggests that interventions at these points are good opportunities for teams to learn new things. I'll share some of this next week when we talk about teams and external dynamics, learning from outside of the team. But my research showed that when teams have interruptions or when there are kind of major transition periods, sometimes that might be in a quarter end or a year-end cycle, or in academics, the academic year is finished, or the summer. There are these natural rhythms or pauses where work activity is lower than it usually is, and those are some places that it might be very good to think about as a team leader, taking time out and engaging in some reflective processing. So what are some things that you can do to do that? Well, one idea, of course, is just general feedback processes. And so the question is, does feedback within teams help? And there's different meta-analysis studies of many studies to show this. And just like you would have learned in my class, in the Leading Others class, feedback interventions can be beneficial and they can be harmful. And we see the same thing happening in teams, that they can be positive or negative. And a lot of whether feedback within teams improves performance in subsequent performance cycles has to do with, are you focused on the individual and what they're trying to do? Or are you thinking about the group and the group goals and how those connect? Does it access and peak motivation, right? Does it tap into things like intrinsic motivation and show people the purpose and the meaning of their work, for example, versus just very transactional behaviors that you're expecting from team members? And does it actually get process learning? So does it help people understand how to improve their work, their contributions in the team? And what we know is that we could look at, do you give the team feedback as a whole? Do you just give individuals feedback, or do you do both of these? And research has looked at comparing these. And the best practice from a quasi-experimental study, this was actually a study of MBA teams that work together for entire semesters in class projects. And the results showed that, first of all, if we do nothing, teams don't correct and they don't end up addressing performance process losses or coordination losses. Teams only improved their overall processes internally and performance overall when there was an integrated process of individual peer feedback combined with a discussion of the team goals and team processes. So we needed to have both of those things, both individual and team feedback and assessment, to improve team performance. So if we look at this outcome, the research was quasi-experimental. So what it meant is that over the course of a couple of years in the MBA program, they tried different interventions. And so they had a comparison group that they didn't do anything. They just let the teams work together and they looked at their performance. And this is the average score on group projects in terms of a grade. And then they had two different kinds of guided reflection conditions. They had intervention that either gave peer feedback, so individuals in the team gave each other feedback about their individual performance, or just focused on team feedback. So had the team reflect on its performance and its charter, and the team had to update their charter and have a goal discussion for the team. So either or. And what we see is, if we just compare these conditions, right, the team only didn't do any better than the comparison feedback. And marginally, I'm not sure it was even statistically significant, though, the peer feedback was a little bit better than either the team only or the comparison group where no intervention was made. Most importantly, this study shows us that the highest performance gains between periods of time and periods of performance occurred when both peer feedback, so individual feedback to team members, and a team-based discussion about the team's charter, how the processes were going to be conducted, and the group goals had the highest overall performance and significant improvement over nothing, or individual feedback alone, or charter team feedback alone. So if you're going to run an intervention like this, here's one suggestion for how you would engage in peer feedback in an intervention design. So I've conducted this in a variety of teams. Basically what this does is it asks every single team member to provide positive, reinforcing feedback and critical feedback to each of their teammates, asking them to do at least 2 pieces or maybe 3 pieces of positive and 2 to 3 pieces of constructive feedback. And the intervention is that the team members have to meet together and talk to each other and first say, I think I'm going to hear this from my team. Here's kind of what I think the team is going to think about me and my performance. And then the recipient opens their package of feedback and reads it out loud in the team and reacts. And some of that reaction might be if you're told you're inconsistent in your participation, you seem distracted, maybe you read that and say, yep, I think that's fair. I haven't been fully present in these meetings. Or I don't feel like that resonates with me. Maybe you could tell me a little bit more about when that's happening. And the group helps interpret the feedback. The team helps people understand why the person might be perceived that way. But the really crucial thing here is that the group has to collectively come up with a way to support individual performance. So this is not a situation of here's how you're bad and you better fix it. It should be here's what is a challenge with how you're showing up in the team. And here's how we as a team are going to help you be better. That is the most crucial part of this feedback intervention and the conversation around this kind of an intervention. So it'd be interesting for you to just think a little bit about, could Henry Tam have conducted this kind of intervention in the MGI team? And could people have had that reflective moment? And more importantly, how does the team, who thinks they're the leaders, if it's the founders, they need to be held accountable for producing a team environment to help individuals perform better. And that's kind of the key message here from the individual peer feedback component of this intervention process. Then the team needs to take on an evaluation of the team's performance itself. And one way to characterize this is team reflexivity. Other ways that this might be characterized is after action review, famously conducted in the armed forces, where after an intervention, there is a structured process of analyzing what happened, what went well, what went wrong, to be able to improve and avoid the same errors again in the future. So team reflexivity is a guided effort to reflect on team's performance. So if we think about those performance cycles where we have the planning and then we have some action where the team's performing and some major part of the action is finished and then there's an opportunity of transition, that's where we would be doing this kind of team reflexivity, would be here in a transition phase before another sort of round of action would happen. So again, I think in the MGI case, the completion of the business plan would have been a great place to have this kind of team reflexivity, to consider what objectives were or were not met, and to think about what about how we conducted our work. How did we work together? The processes that we were engaged in, conflict resolution, decision making, how we reflected on and understood the expertise of the members and if we were leveraging that expertise. And from that, identifying a plan of how we can improve for the future. Very good research evidence about reflexivity that meta-analysis, again, studies that look at many research studies together and combine the outcomes of that research, show that when teams engage in reflexivity, so if they're consciously finding these transition points and engaging in formalized reflection or after action review, those teams have better shared mental models. So those psychological states of understanding are improved. Overall, they have improved collaboration. They're better able to work together and leverage their expertise and skills. They have a better understanding of the work they're trying to accomplish, and decision processes and decision outcomes are improved. And relative to baseline, so teams that don't engage in this, teams that complete these reviews and processes together increase their productivity by over 1 standard deviation above the average of all teams considered. So there's strong evidence that building in these kinds of phased processes, identifying key accomplishment or sub parts of work and engaging in both individual peer feedback constructively trying to understand how the team can change itself to support individual performance, and considering team performance and how the team is operating itself through reflexivity is going to produce the highest performance overall. One way that you might actually apply this sort of intervention design, in ways I've done with groups that I've consulted with, is to have people take a reflection time after completing a significant project stage or phase, and ask people to rate their surprise and satisfaction with the team's performance on that. Assuming you have created a team contract or a charter, it's an opportunity to review that and discuss the effectiveness. Did our pre-planning help us? Did we actually carry out the processes that we identified in our pre-planning? If not, why? What wasn't right about what we anticipated, and how can we update that for the next tasks or phases? And identify specific areas the team should revise. And ultimately, the team should collectively come up with, 3 or a number of its key strengths, its key weaknesses, and then figure out the new process plan to try to reinforce the norms and the structures that support the strengths, and identify new norms and structures to attend to the weaknesses. So overall, understanding process phases and the benefits of both pre-planning and in-process planning and transition phase planning can help understand that you're not done when you form and launch a team, that ongoing effective performance should leverage processes of individual and team-based reflection, reflexivity, and feedback to plan and revise how the team is working to support ongoing learning and improved performance.